Vaccine passports, Eric Clapton, and the drummer from the Offspring. How are we supposed to respond to all this? I'm Matt Odegaard, and welcome to Church Public. Again, welcome to Church Public. Thank you for joining me, Matt Odegaard, here today. We are talking about all things vaccine mandates, and I hope that this finds you well. If you haven't already, you can check out churchpublic.com. You can subscribe to the audio podcast on all of the audio podcast locations, and of course, you can check me out on social media at Church Public. There is a lot going on in the world, and we're just trying to figure out our place in it. A lot of people have been asking me, what am I supposed to do with this vaccine mandate? And whether they are in a business, whether they are in a healthcare situation, or whether they're just trying to figure out what is best for their personal choice. And then you have states like New York, California, certain cities in them that are saying you have to now have a passport that tells whether you're vaccinated or not to be allowed to enter into certain places. And we're trying to figure out, what does that mean? What does that mean for a regular citizen in America? What does that mean for a believer? How are we supposed to respond to this? There's a ton of pressure to get this vaccine. So are you supposed to get it because of the pressure? Are you supposed to believe the doctors, believe the science without question? Are you supposed to use your common sense? How do we deal with this situation? And what is the loving and Christian thing to do? Because I've heard pastors, I've heard theologians, I've heard theology professors say it is your moral duty to get this vaccine in order to protect all of humanity. Is that true? Is it really a moral duty? Is it a biblical duty? Are you supposed to do this? These are questions that I'm getting, and I'm going to try to answer them. You may or may not agree with my presuppositions. You may or may not agree with my conclusions. That's up to you. You don't have to follow me in this, but I'll give you the best information that I can so that you can make whatever decision you want to make. I'm going to try to go with both some of the data that we have available that you can see. It's not secret or magical data, but it is the data that you can check out for yourself if you want to. And I'm going to go with some spiritual fundamentals that you can find out about. Again, it's not secret information. You can read your own Bible. You can read your own theology books. You can study on your own and find out these same things. I'm just trying to compile it all together in one place so that you can make the best kinds of decisions that you can for yourself and your family. So I just want to start with the beginning of this mess. This mess started with, if you don't remember, 2 weeks to slow the spread. 2 weeks to slow the spread was in the interest of, and this is all information, so I feel like more than any, this one may get pulled off all of the platforms, but we'll see what happens. I'm going to try to speak correctly. I'm going to try to speak according to the data, and then let you draw your own conclusions. So those that are watching that want to pull this off, do whatever you want to do. Anyway, so 2 weeks to slow the spread was all about taking this curve and flattening the curve down so that specifically the hospitals were not overwhelmed. It was never about don't get sick, and it was always about people are going to get sick, people are going to get this thing, just like they get all the other things. Viruses are going to virus, and we were trying to not overwhelm the hospitals so that we could take care of the people who did get sick. And we learned a lot of things along the way. Of course, since then, and I didn't even look at the count today, we were at 500 and some days past that a little bit ago. And now it's about, I think, don't ever get sick, and make sure your kids don't get sick, and make sure no one ever dies. Of course, unfortunately, none of those things are possible, right? That's the first assumption that we just have to lay flat out. And we all knew this. And if you're parents, of course you know this. And apparently going into the school year as well. If you're a parent and you have kids, and you have had any kids ever who have gone into a school year, you know, first couple weeks, maybe a month, are terrible because everybody gets back together and everybody gets a cold. That's just what happens. I mean, again, I've been through this so many times now personally. If with kids going into school and then the winter hits, and then you get another cold because it's winter and everybody gets colds. during the winter. But now, apparently, the goal is to never get sick. Now, I haven't said a word about anything vaccine related, so don't censor me for this. We're not talking about that yet. I'm just saying, like, just in general, we all used to know that colds happened, and that's just a part of life. So we have to make sure that we understand if there is a stated goal or unstated goal from the government or from any of the powers that be that are running these organizations. If the stated goal is to have zero sickness ever, we have to admit from the beginning that's a faulty assumption. That's just not possible. It's not possible to never get sick. It's not possible to never die. We've talked about that many times on the program, that unfortunately death is a part of life. But the good news, again, coming back to the Word of God, the good news is we have more than just this life. And as Christians, for a couple thousand years now, we've had this hope in a future that is different from this world. Not that we shouldn't be involved in this world. That's specifically and intentionally why I'm doing this today. We need to be involved in this world, and we need to be specifically involved in this world. So we have to at least start with that underlying reality. And then we talked about, we were told to mask in all situations. We were told the vaccine was going to solve everything. We have really not talked much about natural immunity, and apparently are not allowed to talk much about natural immunity because guidelines have changed or whatever. So I'll breeze on and off of that and try to not get censored. But what I want to look at, which is, I think, undeniable, are some of the numbers. And again, these are numbers you can look at. New York Times has some great numbers. The CDC has some great numbers. There's a bunch of other websites that track some of the numbers because the numbers are important. If you watch the news, any of the news, you will learn from them that this pandemic is again out of control. It's the highest it's ever been. I heard one person on CNN say this is just like smallpox and the smallpox outbreaks over the last couple of centuries, which again, inherently is that's not real, according to numbers. I mean, hundreds of millions of people died there. It's not like the bubonic plague, where a third of, I think, the population of Europe died. That's a lot more. So it's a little bit different. And we all know this. And again, according to the CDC, these are CDC numbers, everyone is at around 99% survivability. And then it changes a little bit from there. In some cases, especially as you get into the older, more experienced reaches in the 80s and 90s of years on Earth, it may drop to 96, 95%, and that's a big difference, and we need to pay attention to that. But especially as you get younger, again, according to the CCs, not my numbers, it's 99.9 some, right? Now, at the height of the pandemic, we know that around 3,000 people were dying per day of this in America. Currently, again, according to the news, it sounds like we're back to that height. According to the New York Times, the number is around 400. It's vacillating a little bit, but around 400 per day. I think I checked this morning, it was like 414 or something like that. That is a vastly different number, like a tenfold different number of the highest point of this pandemic. So yes, cases are way up, but as I've said for a long time, cases don't make that much difference. People are going to get a cold, they're going to get sick, they're going to get COVID. There's another virus that is going around as well that is affecting some hospitals, and we're seeing cases, but by and large, case numbers going up, maybe some hospitalizations going up, but deaths maybe up a little bit, but 400 is vastly different than 3,000 per day, rolling average, right? And then you have some of these mandates in terms of mask mandates, in terms of vaccine passports, and city closures that are beginning to happen again. Cities like San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, County, New York City. They're starting to say you have to have vaccine passports. They're starting to say mask mandates. They're starting to say businesses don't allow unvaccinated in, and those types of things, just for, again, numbers' sake, according to the CDC and the New York Times. In Washington, D.C., total population around, let's change this. Total population in Washington, D.C., around 700,000 people. I mean, quite a few people there. The rolling average of deaths per day from COVID over the last 7 days is 0. Yep, 0. San Francisco County, total population around 900,000, a little under a million on there. Total average rolling deaths per day, also 0. Los Angeles County, total population is around 10 million. The average rolling death there is around 9. So higher, 9 times higher if you're doing numbers than 0. But 9 out of 10 million, still not that many. And then New York City, where we've probably heard the most in terms of these vaccine passports and businesses being compelled to not let people in if they don't have vaccine passports. The total rolling death there is 4. Then we need to look at vaccination numbers. Again, according to the CDC, according to the New York Times, and just as a blanket statement, every person above the age of 12 is now eligible to get a vaccine. This is just true. And you don't have to look far to find one. In fact, you don't have to throw a rock to find one. Every store, almost every pharmacy, every hospital, in almost every case, it's free. There are even some cities and states that are giving you bonuses, like paying you to go and get a vaccine. So everyone is able to get this vaccine. There is no shortage of the vaccine in America. You are able to get it at any time, basically anywhere in the United States. Maybe if you live in the middle of nowhere in Montana, you might have to drive for a bit, but it's available. You just got to get in your truck, right? Totally available to anyone who wants it. Now, in terms of numbers, according to CDC, over the age of 65, adults over the age of 65, around 90% have at least had the first, if not both, rounds of the vaccine. Over 90% of adults over 65. That's a huge number. And as we talked before, in terms of ages of death, I think I might even have a chart for you. Let me give you this chart right quick here. This is the ages of death chart. If you are not looking, over 65 and over 50, but over 65, over 75, over 85 are where the majority of the deaths lie. That has been the case for the entire time we've been tracking numbers and looking at numbers. Then when you go under 50, under 40, under 30, under 20, the deaths drop off dramatically. You can look up this chart if you want, again at the CDC or at the New York Times, but you can see these numbers for sure. But again, just in terms of numbers, over the age of 18, this is, again, according to the CDC, it depends on which number you're looking at, either 50 to 70% of people over 18 have now also been vaccinated. So a huge number. Then according to Dr. Marty Markari, he said that at least somewhere around 50% of people in America also have some form of natural immunity. I know we're not allowed to talk about natural immunity, but some form of natural immunity, either by being exposed to the virus or having it already and then moving on with their life. So there's a lot of immunity, natural or vaccinated, out there already. This is, again, statistically true. I'm not making up numbers. You can go look at these numbers. These are all things. So what I want to get to then is, what do we do about this? Because now the question comes to, again, New York, LA, some other places are talking about vaccine passports. I'm not going to talk about mask mandates right now, though a lot of the places are bringing mask mandates back, which is, I'll just say this, it's a confusing statement if the CDC says, this is according to the CDC now, if you have been vaccinated already, you still need to wear a mask. And that calls into question, is the vaccine working to its fullest extent? Can I say it that way, CDC? Am I getting canceled for that? I don't know. It's just a question. If the vaccine is effective, as it is stated to be, then what does the mask do on top of that? That is just, I think, a fair question. Again, probably will get me kicked off of YouTube, but we'll see what happens. So what is the solution here? And I want to talk about the vaccine passport in just a moment, because that's an important part of this. And I think there is a church response that we have to get to that I just haven't heard a lot of people talk about. And I think it's really important to have a church response to a vaccine passport from a biblical standpoint. But I want to talk about personal responsibility then in a second. You hear anti-vax, pro-vax. I just think both sides of that perspective are out to lunch, honestly. If you say you are anti-vax for all uh, anti all vaccinations, that's just ludicrous. Like, some vaccinations are valuable. We've always known this, and kids need certain vaccinations to help them in school and keep them safe in that sense. But then they also don't need other ones, and we don't need other ones. There's a lot of different scientific data for this, but it's just common sense as well. There are certain things that you don't need to get vaccinated for, like smallpox. I'll just throw that one out. At one point, that may have been necessary. It's not necessary anymore. So you can't say that you're pro all vaccinations. You also shouldn't say that you're anti all vaccinations. Neither point of that matters. What you should say is, what is this specific vaccination? What is my risk factor? And does it make sense for me to get this particular vaccination? That should be an individual decision based on the circumstances and based on information with your doctor. Doctor would say informed consent. Like, do you have the information you need, and do you consent to getting the vaccine in any vaccine that makes any particular sense? That should be the case for every vaccine. It should only make sense in that instance. Again, we looked at this chart before in the deaths by age. If you are in this upper range, if you're 65 plus, if you're 75 plus, if you're 85 plus, then you can see that there are a lot of complications that come with the COVID illness and associated symptoms of that. So you may want to think about this. If a vaccine or any kind of treatment can help you to avoid the most severe of symptoms and possibly even death, and you're already in an age bracket where you are at risk for these things, that seems to make sense. If you are on the other side of this, I don't know if you saw this again, if you're looking at the young ones, again, according to this chart, if you're just listening, 0 to 17 years, this is according to the CDC, these are not my numbers, according to the CDC, as of the latest numbers that I could find, 337 children under the age of 17 have died out of around 70 million children in America. And there was a Johns Hopkins studies that you can look up that said there may be 0 children who died from this without any other pre-existing complications. There may be 0 healthy children that died from this under the age of 18 or 17. Again, you can look that up. You can figure it out. At any rate, 337 out of 70 million or so students, children under 18 in America is a very, very, very small number. Even when you jump up to the 30 age range and cutoff, it's, again, according to the CDC and these numbers, you're around 2,500 people that have died in America. These are not large numbers, so you have to just take into consideration. Does it make sense to, or if you're a healthy individual, does it make sense to do this? And again, this is probably going to get me kicked off. I'll probably post this to Rumble as well, so there'll be a backup video if you want to check it out. But anyway, you have to know that there are other symptoms of the vaccine. There are side effects. There are side effects to every vaccine. There are side effects to Advil. There are side effects to aspirin, ibuprofen. Like, there are side effects to any medicine that you take, period. Full stop. Like, that's just true. Every person has known this up until the last 5 minutes. Every doctor absolutely knows this when they prescribe any medicine. If you've watched any of the infomercials on different medicines, you like hear the little voice that talks really fast at the end of things that says, you might get this and this and this and this and this in every single medication. This is just true. So you have to do a cost benefit analysis. You have to do a risk reward with your own self. Is this worth the risk? And again, it should be an individual decision based on your profile. Are you at risk for certain things, or is the vaccine more at risk? And so then what I want to talk about is people like Eric Clapton. So poor Eric Clapton, right? He, excellent guitarer of many bands and very well respected in the musical world. And he got the vaccine, dutifully, and he lost feeling in his fingers. He thought, maybe I will never be able to play the guitar ever again. This is a big issue, right? His whole livelihood could have been challenged. And as a guitar player myself, that's a terrifying thought. Like, to not be able to, I have some weird carpal tunnel things, and sometimes I can't feel my fingers. Like, I know that feeling, and I've been playing the guitar, and due to some carpal tunnel, like, I have been playing and I can see my fingers and I can move my fingers, but I can't feel my fingers and think like, well, I think I'm playing the right chord, but I can't feel it. And that's a terrifying thing to think, like, maybe I will never play guitar again. This is what Eric Clapton went through, and he was not able to play guitar for a while. Fortunately, as far as he has said, he can play the guitar now. He has his feeling back, but he says this following the Prime Minister's announcement on Monday, 19 July. He said, I have to make an announcement of my own. And that was the announcement was that they're going to start doing, Prime Minister Boris Johnson said, anybody wanting to enter nightclubs or crowded venues has to show proof of COVID vaccination before going in. So again, his livelihood, what he does to play music and then sponsor concerts and events and things like that, the Prime Minister of England said, you cannot go in these places unless you are vaccinated, right? So Eric Clapton said, following the announcement, I feel honor bound to say, I will not perform on any stage where there is a discriminated audience present, end quote. He said, quote, unless there's provision made for all people to attend, I reserve the right to cancel the show. And that's a fair statement. It's a fair statement because, hey, if you start segregating your population based on this, you're going to have big consequences. We're going to talk about more consequences in just 1 second. But before that, I also want to talk about the drummer from the Offspring. If you are a person who grew up in the 90s and listened to some rock and roll in the 90s, Offspring, I can say I listened to the Offspring quite a bit and maybe had a punk rock phase or whatever, but the drummer for the Offspring, who apparently has, I believe it's called Guillain-Barré syndrome, that he has dealt with for a long time. And according to his doctors, is not allowed to have the vaccine because the vaccine could interact with this. And again, literally cause him death. So this is a problem that he is actually at risk. He cannot get the vaccine. So what did his loving band do? The loving band kicked him out of the band. And so now he is not allowed to be in the band after 20 some years. And he is, this is Pete Parata of the Offspring. He is now not allowed to be in the band of the Offspring and tour. They decided to go along without them. He said he's been a member of the band for 14 years, and the band decided, quote, he was unsafe to be around, and they fired him. So, and he also has had the virus. He said, quote, I have caught the virus over a year ago, and it was mild for me. So I'm confident I'm able to handle it again, but I'm not certain I'd be able to survive a post-vaccination round of Guillain-Barré syndrome, which dates back to my childhood. So there are circumstances beyond just like your consent or what you want to do. Do you want to get this? Do you not want to get this? Like, there are medical reasons that you cannot get this, and yet apparently there is no grace for getting the vaccine or not getting the vaccine. So these are problems, and these do have actual real world implications. And I want to talk about church implications in just a second. I do think from a government perspective, this is now my opinion on government, but it is based on research and reading and studying the founding fathers, studying lots of different governments over the years. I do think it's a dangerous thing for the government to mandate certain things like vaccinations and to do passports for things like travel based on something you may or may not be able to control. Again, just take this person, the drummer for the Offspring, who medically cannot get the vaccine. So what are they supposed to do? And then what if religiously you're opposed to this? I haven't even talked about the fact that some of these vaccines were created with aborted fetal cells. And if you are against abortion religiously and you don't want to take it because of that, not all of the vaccines that are available have this, but some of them are. Some of them are made from aborted fetal cells. So what if you are religiously opposed to experimenting on the fetuses of unborn and perhaps murdered babies. Like, that's a moral issue. And you have to reconcile with that. Again, that's not all. There are some vaccines that are not made that way, but some of them are. So what if you're not able to get the one that's not? I mean, again, like you get to these, there are moral questions on whether this vaccine makes sense. And even so, there's spiritual concerns, there's cost benefit concerns, and there are health and risk concerns that you have to figure out. And we don't have that much information. We don't have the full information. So then you get to the problem of church. And I think the issue of church is an issue that we have to figure out. So again, I'm not going to tell you which way to go. What I am going to say, probably multiple times here, is you have to make your decision. And I, for one, will not judge your decision. I don't care if you get it. I don't care if you don't get it. I think you should also hold that view. That's what I'm going to impress. I think that you need to worry about you, and the fact of the matter that we keep hearing that if, for instance, I'll just say it this way, if I don't get it, that I am now responsible for someone else's health, I think that's actually a bridge too far. I think that's a bridge too far, because if I am responsible for someone's health, then the only logical conclusion to that is for me to never leave the house again. That sounds extreme, but that is ultimately true in the telos, in the end of this argument. If your argument is, I am responsible for someone else's health, then there is no action that I can do that is not directly implicated in another human's health. There is no action. Driving my car is directly implicated in another person's health. I may miss a red light and kill a person. I'm directly influenced in their health. I may have just a cold beyond COVID, because again, we're talking about one myopic issue of COVID and the COVID vaccine. What if there's another issue? What if there's another virus? What if there's a virus I don't even know I have? This idea of, like, I think it was Typhoid Mary, right? That was a whole thing where this person had a disease they didn't even know they had and were incidentally infecting a bunch of people. I'm not saying that is the same equivalent, but I'm saying there are more viruses. There are millions of viruses in the world. There are probably, again, I'm not an epidemiologist. I can just say there are a lot of viruses. There's a lot of bacteria that you come into contact with every single day. So if the goal is for you to never put another person at risk or at harm in the universe, then the only possible conclusion to that is to never go outside. That is the only possible conclusion. And I don't think that's tenable. It also isn't healthy. Then you get into psychology of, and even biblical theology of, we are supposed to be in relationship with other people. We are designed to be in relationship with other people. So to say, because of a virus, according to the CDC, with a 99 point something % survival rate, I am now never supposed to leave my house in order to keep the other people in the world 100% safe, that is against psychology. It's against common sense. It's against spiritual ideals of the body of Christ, and we cannot keep other people 100% safe. Loving people, as Jesus has said, and we're going to talk about that in a moment from a church perspective, is something we should do, but you are not responsible for everyone else's safety. If you have an issue, if you have a pre-existing condition, if you have something where you need to keep yourself safe, unfortunately, in most instances, that's mostly your responsibility. There may be other friends or family around you that can help you with that, but to expect every other individual on the planet to be responsible for your safety is an unrealistic expectation in any sense of the word. It just is. And that may sound unempathetic, but at some point, we have to take our lives into our hands, which we do every day when we walk out the front door. Whether we're walking, there are people every day who get hit by falling objects and die, which is mostly nobody else's fault. And yet this is part of the life that we live, that you go outside and you do literally risk life and death every day, whether you admit it, whether you acknowledge it or not. And to focus in on this one tiny myopic virus is a little bit short-sighted in the scope of all of human life. Again, I said this before. I don't think safety is the ultimate goal. I think freedom is the ultimate goal, because in order to enforce safety, this is what you get. You get a vaccine mandate, a vaccine passport, a mask mandate. You get the government telling you, like places like Australia, New Zealand, England, Canada now in some places, you have to stay inside. That's the only way this works. Is if you're not going to do it, the government is going to make you do it. So if the end goal is safety and the end goal is to never get sick and never die, then the government's going to have to force you to be safe. And that means you cannot have freedom. In order to have freedom, you have to have risk. And that's scary to some people, I guess. And if that scares you too much, again, you choose your path in that. That's fine. I'm not going to judge you for that. But you have to choose freedom if you want it, which inherently is not necessarily safe. And that's okay. There was this old country song that was live like you were dying, and you try new things and you try exciting things, and you might not even survive that experience. But how amazing is that experience? Because this life is supposed to be lived. When Jesus says he wants to give you a life and a life abundantly, it's not to sit around in your house by yourself with no contact with anybody. Again, according to the CDC now, back to some of these mask mandates, you are supposed to mask around anyone who is unvaccinated, whether you are vaccinated or not. This is according to the CDC. This is not me. This is the new, whether you call it a mandate or their proposed ideals, right, is that you're supposed to mask around anyone who's not vaccinated. According to the CDC, according to the FDA, people under 12 are not able to get vaccinated. So that means inherently that if you live with children under 12 who are not vaccinated, you are now required to mask in your own house, whether you are vaccinated or not. This is where this goes. This is where the end of this goes. If you choose safety, then you will end up with ridiculous rules like I am supposed to wear a mask 100% of the time around my children in my own house, which is, I'm sorry, I will draw the line at that. I'm not doing that. Like, there's no way I'm doing that. My children need my face. I need to see their face. They need to see my face. We need to hug each other. We're going to love each other. I mean, that's how I'm living with my children. Anyway, I want to get to the church here. I've gone a little longer than I wanted to, but I think this is important. So there was a little more than 1,000 leaders in the United Kingdom who summed some of this up really well. They said that the mandate for vaccine passports is really bad, and they say, quote, it has the potential to bring about the end of liberal democracy as we know it. And they are 100% right. They said, quote, it's one of the most dangerous policy proposals ever to be made in the history of British politics. And I would say that the United States versions of this are similar. Because here's the deal, and I'll just read a couple more quotes from them and we'll talk about it. Quote, for some Christians, serious issues of conscience related to the ethics of vaccine manufacture or testing have caused people to not necessarily want to. But here's what they say, quote, we risk creating a two-tier society, a medical apartheid in which an underclass of people who decline vaccination or are not able to get vaccination are excluded from significant areas of public life. This is a legitimate fear that this scheme would be the thin edge of the wedge. It has the potential to bring about the end of liberal democracy as we know it and create a surveillance state in which the government uses technology to control certain aspects of citizens' lives. End quote. So here's the point. The vaccine passports are being used for businesses, but if this has an end goal, the end goal would be the vaccine passport is for everything, for flying, for driving, for going to the grocery store, and of course for going to church. Because you can't, if the government is controlling this and the government is saying this is a necessary issue, then why would the church be excluded from this necessary issue? And of course it would not. And as we've seen over the last year, the government is trying to push into church life by shutting down churches in New York and Los Angeles and California and other places around the country and around the world. The government is trying to push into church life. So if a vaccine passport or something like it was implemented and mandated by the government, then you create this place where the church and the leaders of the church are not able to minister to people who are not in this prescribed idea. Like if you don't have a passport and you need ministry from the church, then what do? Then you've created two classes of people that will break society, and all of a sudden, like, forget the rest of society for a second and just look at the microcosm of the church. This is a terrible idea for within the church, and that makes so much sense. I hope that makes so much sense, because as ministers, as the ministry, to believers, to unbelievers, to, as Jesus said, love one another. If you draw this line between mandating vaccines for people and then not allowing people who are unvaccinated into businesses, into workplaces, into the church, which again, this will come. I'm just telling you, this is the end of it. You can't say as a society that the government will only do vaccine mandates for a business or for a workplace or for a grocery store. The next step will be the church. Of course it will be. Like, that is only the logical conclusion, because all of a sudden you've said you can only go in these places if you have the certain papers. So if you don't go in those places, of course, someone in the government is going to say, well, obviously they can't do church connected. You can't be together in church and then go separately to your business or to the market. Of course, that's the next thing that's coming. And from a church perspective, we cannot stand for that. We can't stand for that because we have to minister to people regardless of who they are. That is literally the whole point, regardless of who you are, regardless of where you come from, regardless of your status. I mean, look at Jesus, just as a quick example. Over and over and over and over again, he went to the sick people that nobody else wanted to look at, nobody else wanted to touch. And what did he do? He touched them. He physically touched them in times when people were deathly afraid of getting whatever disease they had. They were unclean. They were pushed to the edge of the city. People didn't want to look at them because they were gross and ugly. And we are literally, as a culture, as a society, maybe even as a government, making these same things enforced by mandate, that this person is now unclean and you're not allowed to look at them, to touch them. Like, how ludicrous have we gotten? Like, how insane upside down clown world have we gotten into that we don't see this and the effect of this? So again, I'm going to say super clearly, I don't care if you get the vaccine or not. It doesn't matter to me at all. But if you start saying you have to show proof that you've done this thing that may or may not make everyone safe, that apparently, again, according to the CDC, this is not me, doesn't matter then if you're vaccinated or not, you still have to wear a mask. You still have to segregate. You still have to social distance. And now you're saying that you, whether you got it, you can go over here. And you, if you didn't get it, you have to go over here. And now we move that into the church. Like, again, if we do this, this will happen. 100% this will happen. I hate to like point into the future and say things that are going to come, but this is 100% going to be the way it goes. If we go this way, 100% this is going to be the way. And we cannot have this as a church. We have to have the freedom. Again, this is why the founders wrote it into the first documents. It's so important that we understand the freedom of expression is there are some things that are not human rights. Freedom of expression of worship is a human right. It is a human right because we have to be able to worship God in that freedom. When you start saying you can't pray, you can't go to church, you can't go into a church if you're not vaccinated, like, these are big, big spiritual and moral issues that we just can't stand for as a church. Like, it's just, again, it's insanity. I'm starting to lose it a little bit. Anyway, we've got to take back control of this, and we've got to push back on this in whatever way we can, whether that's writing your representative or talking or posting or getting kicked off social media. I don't know exactly how we're going to do this, but we've got to start talking about this and push back against this, because it's just not good. It's not good for us to separate people according to race. It's not good for us to separate people according to class. It's not good for us to separate people according to vaccination status. Like, any separation of people, as Paul says in Galatians, is not the way. Slave or free or Jew or Greek or male or female or rich or poor. We don't want separation in our community. We want unity in our community. And by setting up these lines of whatever, voluntary or involuntary separation, we are setting ourselves up for disunity and problems in the church and in the more of society. So that is my stance on it. I don't think mandating vaccines is a good idea. You have to make your own decision, and I think you should figure that out. I think you should look at the numbers and look at your age and look at your status and talk to your doctor. Like, don't listen to me, don't believe me. Like, you have a doctor for a reason, and see what they say. And there are some people on the hill that say certain things, but they may or may not be practicing doctors, I'll say it that way. So talk to a doctor who is practicing and who knows you and who can assess your status and whether they think you are vulnerable or not. Like, figure it out and go your own way, and don't let people tell you what to do. We are free, and we are set free for freedom, and that's an important concept both in the church and in society. Jesus has set us free, and we're not supposed to be mindless. We're supposed to think for ourselves and figure these things out. So thank you for listening. If you are able to hear this, we'll see what happens when it gets posted, and God bless. As always, I do hope that you keep the faith.